Hey, everyone. I'm Daniel. I never thought I'd end up writing something like this, but life throws curveballs that knock you out cold. I need to get this off my chest because I feel like I'm unraveling. Lisa, my wife of 8 years, was my everything. She wasn't just my partner, she was my best friend, the one I thought would stick by me no matter what. Turns out, I didn't really know her at all. It all started about a month ago during a wedding weekend. We were guests at her college friend's big event, the kind where everyone's decked out, and the wine flows endlessly. Lisa seemed different that weekend. She was glued to her phone, whispering excuses about work, and I caught her stepping outside a few times, always in a hurry. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe she was handling something last minute. But my gut was telling me otherwise. The second red flag came when she kept brushing me off. During the reception, she barely danced with me. Every time I tried to start a conversation, she'd cut it short or suddenly need to check in with a friend. Then there was Jeff Harper. He was one of the groomsmen, a charming guy with too perfect hair and the kind of smirk that screams trouble. I noticed Lisa laughing too hard at his jokes, standing a little too close during group photos, and the way her eyes lit up when he spoke to her. By the time we got home, something felt broken. Lisa was quieter than usual, avoiding eye contact, and always tired. That's when her secrecy ramped up, locking her phone, working late, the whole cliché package. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was paranoid. I mean, Lisa would never cheat. Or so I thought. Then the bomb dropped. She came back from a doctor's appointment, pale and shaky. When I asked what was wrong, she brushed it off again, but eventually the truth spilled out. She had contracted an STD. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. She tried to play it off like it could have been something dormant, but I wasn't buying it. I pressed her until she cracked, and that's when I learned about Jeff. Apparently, they connected during the wedding. One drink turned into dancing, which turned into sneaking off together. She claimed it was a one-time thing, but the deleted texts I found later told a different story. They'd been in touch ever since, graphic, flirty messages confirming it wasn't just physical but emotional too. My wife was falling for another man while I sat at home, clueless. I can't even describe how it felt. Rage, humiliation, heartbreak, it all hit me like a truck. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to be a doormat. If Lisa and Jeff thought they could shatter my life and walk away unscathed, they had another thing coming. After Lisa's confession, my world didn't just crumble, it detonated. I couldn't think straight. I sat there staring at her, trying to make sense of the person in front of me. The woman I married, the one who used to hold my hand like she'd never let go, was now a stranger. I needed answers. How long? Why him? Was I just some placeholder? But Lisa didn't seem ready to give me much more than excuses. She cried, begged, said it was a mistake, that she didn't mean for it to happen. It didn't mean anything, Daniel, she said, like that was supposed to soften the blow. But you don't cheat by accident, and you sure as hell don't keep texting the guy after. Her phone, always guarded like Fort Knox, became my next target. I wasn't going to let her brush this off like a lapse in judgment. That night, while she was in the shower, I grabbed it. It took a few tries, but I guessed her passcode, our anniversary. That stung in its own way. What I found there, it was worse than I thought. She had deleted most of the messages, but I recovered enough to get the gist. They weren't just hooking up, they were emotionally entangled. Jeff wasn't some random fling. He was a full-blown affair partner. They joked about me, about keeping things discreet, and reminisced about their time at the wedding. The photos he sent her, shirtless and smug, made my stomach turn. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself. At that moment, I wasn't just angry, I was determined. If Lisa wanted to burn our marriage to the ground, I'd make sure she was standing in the ashes alone. The next morning, I confronted her. She tried the usual deflection. I didn't mean for you to find those. Not, I'm sorry for doing this. Classic. I told her I wanted a divorce. The color drained from her face, but she didn't argue. She probably thought I'd forgive her again like some clueless chump. But this time, I wasn't just walking away. I needed a plan, a way to make sure Lisa and her golden boy felt every ounce of pain they'd put me through. That's when I got methodical. First, I called my lawyer. I explained the situation, laid out my suspicions, and told him I had proof of the affair. He asked for everything I had: texts, screenshots, financial records. Financial records? That's when it clicked. I went through our joint accounts and found charges that didn't add up: hotels, expensive dinners, even a spa day while I was out of town. Marital funds, funding her betrayal. Then came the groundwork. I reached out to friends who had been at the wedding. A few of them were more than willing to spill what they'd seen: Lisa acting flirty with Jeff, disappearing with him after the reception. One friend even overheard them arguing in the hallway the next morning. "You've got all the ammo you need," my lawyer said when I relayed this. Lisa didn't know it yet, but she'd handed me the tools to destroy her life on a silver platter. And as for Jeff? Oh, he wasn't off the hook. I wasn't just going to watch while the guy who helped wreck my marriage walked away scot-free. No, I had plans for him too. Lisa thought I'd just pack my bags and leave quietly, maybe lick my wounds and let her and Jeff ride off into the sunset. That wasn't going to happen. I wasn't just going to end this. I was going to make sure she felt every bit of the betrayal she dealt me. After gathering all the evidence, I made my first move, ensuring Lisa's infidelity would take center stage in the divorce. My lawyer, Tom, was ruthless. "Judges don't take kindly to cheaters who blow through joint funds," he said. We worked together to craft an airtight case. The screenshots, the financial statements, the testimonies from friends, they all painted a picture of a woman who had not only betrayed her husband but abused their shared finances to fund her affair. Tom filed for divorce, citing her adultery. Lisa got served while she was at work. I guess she hadn't been expecting it, because she showed up at the house that evening in tears, holding the papers. "Daniel, we can talk about this. We can work through it," she pleaded, her voice cracking. I just stood there, arms crossed. "We're past talking, Lisa. You made your choice. Now you're going to live with it." She dropped the crocodile tears pretty quickly when she realized I wasn't backing down. "Fine," she snapped, her voice sharp now. "But you don't have to drag me through the mud. We can make this civil." "Civil?" I laughed bitterly. "You used our money to cheat on me and lied about it for weeks. I'm just getting started." That night, I started phase 2, dismantling her image. Lisa was a rising star at her job, marketing director at a well-known firm. Her boss? A stickler for ethics. I anonymously sent him an email with a neat little package: screenshots of her affair, the timeline of her business trips that were actually rendezvous with Jeff, and the receipts showing misuse of our funds. It didn't take long for the fallout to hit. Within a week, she was demoted for violating company policies. She wasn't fired, but her reputation took a serious hit. Coworkers whispered, clients distanced themselves, and Lisa stopped coming home with the smug, confident air she once had. Meanwhile, I made sure our social circle knew the truth. A few friends had already seen the cracks, and it didn't take much for them to turn on her. I didn't even have to embellish, just presented the facts. Soon, Lisa found herself excluded from the group chats, the weekend barbecues, the birthday dinners. Her best friend, Stephanie, stopped returning her calls. Jeff wasn't getting off easy either. I knew he worked as a realtor in a competitive market, so I used what I had. I created a series of anonymous online posts exposing him for the sleazeball he was. Nothing outright defamatory, but just enough for people to connect the dots. "Beware of Jeff Harper," I wrote. "Untrustworthy, unethical, and lacking character. Would you want this man handling your most important transactions?" The internet has a way of amplifying whispers into roars. His online reviews took a nosedive. One day, I even dropped by his office, unannounced. When I walked in, he was with a client, his trademark smirk plastered across his face. "Jeff," I said loudly, cutting through the chatter, "how's your side hustle as a homewrecker going?" His face went pale. The client looked confused, then uncomfortable. "You need to leave," Jeff muttered, his voice low but trembling. I didn't budge. "Don't worry, I'm just here to congratulate you. Breaking up marriages and ruining lives must be pretty rewarding, huh?" The client got up and left, muttering something about finding another agent. I turned back to Jeff, who looked ready to explode. "We're just getting started, buddy," I said, walking out. That night, I opened a bottle of whiskey and sat alone in the quiet house. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But knowing Lisa and Jeff were paying for what they did, that felt good. Real good. After the office confrontation with Jeff, I decided it was time to escalate things. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking control of a situation I never asked for and showing them there were consequences for their actions. Lisa was unraveling. I could see it in the way she moved around the house, avoiding eye contact and jumping at every text notification. The confidence she once wore like armor had vanished. She didn't know what I had planned, and I intended to keep it that way. The next step was gathering more evidence for the divorce proceedings. I hired a private investigator, someone who could dig deeper than I ever could. Within a week, they handed me a file packed with information, more hotel stays, receipts for gifts Jeff had given her, with money she likely helped him acquire, and even photos of them together. One image showed them at a hotel bar, leaning in close, their faces practically touching. Another showed Jeff's hand on her lower back as they walked into a room. Armed with this, I met with my lawyer again. "This will cinch it," Tom said, flipping through the file. "The judge is going to have a hard time overlooking this. You're in a strong position, Daniel." And then there was the matter of assets. Lisa didn't know it, but I had been quietly moving my finances into separate accounts. Our joint savings, investments, even a business venture we'd started together. I secured as much as I could. My lawyer assured me it was legal, given the circumstances. Lisa noticed, of course. "Why is the account balance so low?" she asked one night, holding her phone like it was a lifeline. "Because I'm not funding your lifestyle anymore," I shot back. "You can ask Jeff for money if you need it." She had no response. Her lips parted as if to argue, but then she turned away, retreating upstairs. It was another small victory in a war she wasn't equipped to win. As for Jeff, his life was unraveling just as quickly. The online posts I'd made about him gained traction, and I started hearing whispers about clients backing out of deals. A few well-placed calls to other realtors in the area, posing as a concerned homeowner, helped spread the word further. One agent I spoke to even laughed when I mentioned his name. "Yeah, we've heard the stories," she said. "Thanks for the heads up." But I wasn't done yet. I found out Jeff was planning an open house event for a high-profile property. Perfect. I waited until the day of, dressed casually, and arrived unannounced. The event was in full swing, with potential buyers milling about and Jeff in his element, flashing that smarmy grin as he pitched the property. I waited until he was mid-conversation with a couple, then approached. "Jeff Harper," I said loudly, drawing attention from nearby guests. He froze. "Yes." I stepped closer. "How's business? I hear you've been getting a lot of attention lately." Word travels fast when you're known for extracurricular activities. The couple exchanged awkward glances, clearly uncomfortable. Jeff stammered something about needing to attend to another client and tried to move past me, but I wasn't done. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the room, "if you're looking for a house, you might want to make sure your realtor doesn't moonlight as someone who wrecks families. Just a friendly tip." The tension in the room was palpable. Jeff's face was beet red, his composure completely shattered. He escorted me out himself, his hand gripping my arm tighter than necessary. "You've made your point," he hissed. "Now leave." "Oh, I'm just getting started," I said, brushing him off. That evening, I got a call from my investigator. "We've uncovered some personal financial trouble on Jeff's end," he said. "Credit card debt, overdue payments, and a foreclosure threat on a property he owns. Looks like he's barely keeping it together." It was exactly what I needed. Jeff and Lisa thought they could hurt me without repercussions, but now they were facing a storm neither of them could weather. The satisfaction I felt wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my power. They had taken something from me, something precious, and I wasn't going to let them walk away like nothing happened. Lisa had always been good at wearing a mask, but now it was slipping. After the papers were served and her demotion at work, her confidence took a nosedive. She'd stopped trying to defend herself in front of me, resorting to silence or half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. "I know I messed up, Daniel," she said one night, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "But you're not perfect either. We both made mistakes in this marriage." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "Oh, is that right? Which one of my mistakes led to you sleeping with another man?" She flinched, but I didn't care. This wasn't a conversation, it was an autopsy. She tried again. "Can't we just move forward? For both of us? For what we had?" "What we had," I repeated, leaning forward, "is dead, Lisa. You killed it. And I'm not interested in moving forward. I'm interested in making sure you and Jeff feel every ounce of what you've done." That shut her up. She stood and went upstairs without another word. The silence in the house that night was deafening, but I didn't mind. I was done trying to make sense of her. The fallout in her personal life was becoming impossible for her to ignore. One by one, friends started ghosting her. Stephanie, her so-called best friend, finally sent her a message that said it all. "I can't be a part of this, Lisa. What you did was cruel, and I don't support it. Don't call me again." Lisa had always thrived on her social connections, but now they were crumbling. I'd made sure the truth got around, and people were choosing sides. Most of them chose mine. Even her own family was distant, offering only clipped responses when she called. At work, things weren't much better. One night, she came home and slammed her bag on the counter. "They're giving my accounts to someone else," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm being phased out." "Sounds like the consequences of your actions," I said without looking up from my laptop. She glared at me, but there wasn't much fight left in her. The cracks in her armor were spreading, and I was watching her crumble piece by piece. While Lisa was busy losing her grip, I was strengthening mine. The private investigator uncovered something big. Lisa and Jeff had met up after the wedding weekend for a second date at a luxury hotel, using funds she'd taken from our joint account. This wasn't a fling, it was a full-blown affair, complete with planned getaways and promises. I compiled this information, adding it to the growing file of evidence. It wasn't just about the divorce anymore, it was about ensuring she wouldn't walk away with a dime more than she deserved. I wanted the house, the savings, and most importantly, the narrative. She wouldn't get to spin this as some mutual failure. The truth would be undeniable. One evening, Lisa tried a different tactic. "Daniel, this isn't who you are," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the couch where I was watching TV. "You're not vindictive. You're a good man. You don't have to destroy me." I muted the TV and looked at her, unimpressed. "No, Lisa, I didn't destroy you. You did that to yourself. I'm just making sure you don't get to pretend you didn't." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel the usual pang of sympathy. That part of me had been burned out. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said flatly. "You should have thought of that before you crawled into bed with Jeff." She left the room, and I turned the volume back up. Meanwhile, Jeff was spiraling. The anonymous posts about his character were gaining traction, and clients were pulling out of deals left and right. I'd also discovered his favorite hangout spot, a swanky downtown bar, and made sure to stop by one evening when he was there. I didn't even have to approach him this time. Just being in the same room made him visibly uncomfortable. He left within minutes, leaving his drink untouched. It was a small, petty victory, but I savored it. The storm was still brewing, and the eye hadn't even hit yet. Lisa and Jeff had no idea what was coming next. The cracks in Lisa's life turned into full-blown fractures. She came home one evening, pale and shaken. "They're letting me go," she muttered, dropping onto the couch. "They said it's for performance reasons, but I know it's because of everything." I didn't feign sympathy. "Well, actions have consequences," I said coldly. She didn't argue. She just sat there, staring at the floor. Her family, too, was pulling back. Her mother, who once adored her, now spoke to me more often than her. "I don't know what's gotten into Lisa," she told me during one call. "We raised her better than this." The divorce proceedings ramped up. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered was presented to the court. The judge's reaction to the financial misuse and infidelity was exactly what I'd hoped for. Lisa looked small, defeated, and utterly out of her depth. Meanwhile, Jeff was floundering. Word had spread far enough that his employer started getting complaints. He'd gone from a top agent to someone no one wanted to work with. The realtors I'd reached out to were making sure his reputation stayed tarnished. One evening, I got an unexpected message from him. "Enough. Let's settle this like men." I ignored it. He wasn't worth my time. Lisa tried once more to mend things. "Maybe we can be friends after all this," she said one night, her voice trembling. I laughed. "Friends? Lisa, I don't think you understand. I'm not just divorcing you. I'm erasing you." Her tears didn't faze me this time. The woman who had once been my everything was now just a reminder of what I'd survived. Jeff's career took a nosedive. Word about his personal and professional issues was spreading fast, and his office was hemorrhaging clients. I heard through the grapevine that his boss gave him an ultimatum: fix his reputation or find another job. Meanwhile, I wasn't done. I sent an anonymous email to a local real estate blog, hinting at Jeff's unethical behavior and attaching a few receipts that conveniently didn't mention me. The post gained traction, adding another layer to his growing problems. A week later, I got a call from a mutual acquaintance. "Did you hear about Jeff?" they asked. "He's filing for bankruptcy." Guess the big shot realtor wasn't as stable as he acted. Good. One more step in the right direction. Lisa's life was unraveling even faster. She'd stopped trying to argue or defend herself, now just walking through the house like a ghost. When her parents called to check on me and the situation, they didn't even ask to speak to her. She tried to salvage what she could of her social life, reaching out to friends who used to adore her. Most of them ignored her. One even told me, "She's poison, Daniel. We don't want her around." Her last attempt at damage control came in the form of a public apology on Facebook. She posted some vague nonsense about mistakes being made and hoping for understanding. The comments were brutal. People who once fawned over her tore her apart, calling her out for betraying me. She deleted the post within hours. I could feel the tide turning completely in my favor. The divorce court wasn't just leaning my way, it was fully on my side. Lisa's infidelity, the financial misuse, and her lack of a support network sealed her fate. At the next hearing, the judge ruled that I'd retain the house, the majority of our savings, and wouldn't be responsible for any debts she'd incurred during her affair. Lisa sat there, visibly shaking, as the judge announced her decision. When we left the courthouse, she finally broke down. "Is this what you wanted, Daniel?" she cried. "Yes," I replied, walking away without looking back. Jeff's downfall picked up speed. His bankruptcy filing became public record, and it spread through the local real estate community like wildfire. Clients bailed on him faster than he could plead his case. His sleek downtown office shut down, and he was forced to operate out of his apartment, a far cry from the luxury lifestyle he'd once flaunted. But I wasn't finished. A little digging revealed that Jeff had been using shady tactics in his deals, bending rules to close sales quickly. I forwarded the evidence to the state real estate board. They launched an investigation. Within weeks, his license was suspended pending a formal hearing. The last time I saw him, he was standing outside a coffee shop, arguing with someone over the phone. He looked disheveled, a shadow of the smug guy I'd confronted weeks earlier. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Lisa, now jobless and virtually friendless, moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. She tried to reach out to me multiple times, leaving voicemails that swung between tearful apologies and angry accusations. I didn't respond to any of them. Her parents, who had been pillars of support for her throughout our marriage, were now barely speaking to her. Her mother called me once, crying about how disappointed they were. "We don't even recognize her anymore, Daniel," she said. I didn't relish their pain, but I wasn't about to play the mediator. Lisa had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The final court date was brief. The judge signed off on the settlement, the house, the savings, and no spousal support for Lisa. She was left with a modest portion of our assets, barely enough to cover her mounting debts. When it was over, she tried to catch me outside. "Daniel, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Don't leave me like this." I looked at her for a long moment. "You left me first, Lisa," I said, then turned and walked away for the last time. The first night after the divorce was finalized, I sat alone in my now renovated house, a bottle of whiskey on the table. For the first time in months, I felt calm. The chaos was over, and I had my life back. Lisa and Jeff had destroyed what we had, but I had made sure they paid for it. Their lives were in ruins, and I was free to rebuild mine. But this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of my next chapter. Jeff's career wasn't just damaged, it was obliterated. The state real estate board's suspension became permanent after they uncovered more shady dealings. By the time they were done, his name was as good as mud in the industry. The cherry on top came when one of his former clients filed a lawsuit against him for misrepresentation in a property sale. I wasn't directly involved in that one, but hearing about it gave me a sense of poetic justice. Jeff Harper, the man who thought he could take everything from me, now had nothing himself. Lisa, on the other hand, was stuck in survival mode. She picked up a job at a small retail store, a far cry from her cushy corporate position. Rumors of her affair still followed her, even among her new co-workers. One of my friends saw her at a grocery store. "She looked rough," he told me. "Barely made eye contact with anyone." I felt no sympathy. This was her doing, and she was finally living with the consequences. The house felt different without her. I'd spent the last month redecorating, getting rid of anything that reminded me of our marriage. The wedding photos? Gone. Her favorite curtains? Replaced. I even painted over the wall where she had insisted on hanging that tacky abstract painting she loved so much. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was my home. Lisa reached out one last time, sending me an email. It was long and rambling, full of apologies, justifications, and half-hearted attempts to reconcile. I know I've lost everything, she wrote. But maybe we can at least rebuild some kind of connection. I don't want to end things like this. I didn't reply. She had already ended things when she chose Jeff. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally move forward. And I planned to. The silence from Lisa became permanent after that email. I guess she finally understood there was nothing left to salvage. I heard through the grapevine that her apartment lease was up and she'd moved in with a distant cousin. It made sense. She was broke and barely making enough to cover her expenses. Meanwhile, I was thriving. With the house fully renovated, I decided to host a small dinner party for close friends. It felt good to fill the space with laughter and good company again, to reclaim what had once felt like a prison. Stephanie, Lisa's former best friend, pulled me aside that night. "You look happier than I've seen you in years," she said. "I am," I replied simply. And it was the truth. Jeff, on the other hand, was in freefall. The lawsuit against him gained traction, and with no income and mounting legal fees, he was forced to sell his car and move into a rundown rental. The cocky man who had smirked his way into my life was now a shadow of himself. A mutual acquaintance showed me his updated LinkedIn profile. Customer service specialist, at a call center. I couldn't help but laugh. The divorce settlement came through officially, and with it, I finally felt free. The assets were mine, the debts weren't, and my slate was clean. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about the principle. Lisa and Jeff had gambled with my life and lost, and now I had the chance to start over. That weekend, I started working on a project I'd put off for years, building a workshop in the backyard. It was something I'd always wanted, and now, without Lisa's interference, it felt like the perfect time. As I hammered the first nails into place, I realized I wasn't just rebuilding a workshop, I was rebuilding myself. Life without Lisa became simpler. No more tense silences, no more walking on eggshells, no more wondering what secrets she was keeping. It felt like I'd been holding my breath for years, and now I could finally exhale. I threw myself into work, taking on new challenges that reminded me of what I was capable of. My performance didn't go unnoticed. Within a month, I landed a promotion. It felt good to be recognized, especially after months of feeling invisible in my own marriage. I also started reconnecting with old friends. People I'd drifted away from during the marriage were suddenly reaching out, inviting me to barbecues, game nights, and weekend hikes. It was a welcome change from the isolation I'd felt when everything fell apart. One Saturday, I joined a group hike in a nearby park. That's where I met Emily. She was new to the area, having moved to town for a job in graphic design. We hit it off immediately, her laugh was infectious, and she had a way of making even small talk feel meaningful. We exchanged numbers, and by the end of the week, she texted me, "Had fun on the hike. Want to grab coffee sometime?" For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled at my phone without hesitation. Meanwhile, Jeff's downward spiral continued. The lawsuit against him was settled out of court, leaving him even deeper in debt. Word spread that he'd taken a second job delivering food just to stay afloat. I thought about confronting him again, one last time to see what he had to say for himself. But when I drove by his new place, a dingy apartment complex with peeling paint and rusted railings, I decided against it. He wasn't worth the gas money. Lisa, too, was fading into the background. I hadn't heard from her since her last email, and the updates I got from mutual connections were sparse. "She's keeping her head down," one friend told me. "Not much left for her here." Good. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no interest in reopening it. 2 weeks after our hike, Emily and I met for coffee. It was easy, no pressure, no pretense. We talked about everything from her favorite books to my ridiculous DIY projects, laughing like old friends. When she asked about my past, I was honest but brief. "My ex cheated on me," I said. "It was messy, but I came out stronger for it." She nodded, her expression soft. I'm glad you did. You seem like someone who knows what they want now. I didn't say it out loud, but for the first time, I felt like she was right. That night, I sat on the porch of my newly renovated home, looking out at the workshop in progress. The stars were bright, the air crisp, and for the first time in months, I felt at peace. Lisa and Jeff had taken so much from me, but they hadn't taken everything. I'd rebuilt my life brick by brick, and it was finally starting to feel like my own again. Stay tuned. The future's looking brighter. Emily and I started seeing each other regularly. What I liked most was how easy it was. No games, no drama, just two people enjoying each other's company. She wasn't pushy about my past, which was a welcome change. I felt like I could be myself around her, and that was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. One evening, over dinner, she asked me about my workshop. You talk about it a lot, she said, smiling. When am I going to see this masterpiece in the making? Give me a couple of weeks to finish it, I said. Then you'll be the first to see it. She grinned. Deal. Meanwhile, the last traces of Lisa's presence in my life were disappearing. I finally donated the few items she'd left behind. Clothes, books, and a pair of shoes she used to swear were her lucky heels. It felt good to close that chapter completely. Mutual friends, the ones who had stayed loyal to me, told me she was keeping a low profile. She's not doing well, Stephanie admitted during a phone call. But honestly, Daniel, she brought it on herself. Hearing that didn't bring me the satisfaction it once might have. I'd moved on in ways she probably couldn't imagine. One afternoon, while I was working on the workshop, Lisa's mom called. I hadn't spoken to her in months, so her name on my phone startled me. I just wanted to check in, she said. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. I know everything's over between you two, but I wanted you to know how sorry I am for what happened. Thank you, I said, keeping my tone neutral. She's not the same, Daniel, she continued. She knows she made a mistake, but I don't think she'll ever recover from it. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I simply said, I hope she finds her way. After he hung up, I sat on the edge of my workbench, staring at the tools scattered in front of me. It was strange hearing about Lisa like that, as someone broken and lost. Once upon a time, I might have felt compelled to help her. Now, all I felt was a distant kind of pity. By the time the workshop was finished, it felt like a symbol of everything I'd been through. It wasn't just a space to work, it was proof that I could build something strong and meaningful out of the wreckage of my life. Emily was true to her word, coming over to see it the day I finished. It's perfect, she said, running her fingers along the freshly sanded wood. It's a work in progress, I said, smiling. Aren't we all? She replied. She stayed for dinner that night, and as we sat on the porch with glasses of wine, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized how far I'd come. Emily and I grew closer as the weeks went by. She brought out a side of me I hadn't seen in years, light-hearted, curious, and dare I say happy. We started spending weekends together, exploring nearby towns, trying new restaurants, and even tackling a DIY project in my workshop. This is turning out way better than I expected, she said one Saturday as we painted a birdhouse we'd built together. Low bar. I teased. She laughed. Not at all. I just didn't think you'd be so handy with a paintbrush. It was the kind of simple, easy joy I hadn't realized I needed. Lisa's shadow, though faint, still lingered in the background. One evening, while Emily and I were having dinner at a local cafe, I spotted Lisa's cousin at another table. She must have recognized me because, after a few hesitant glances, she approached. Daniel, she said, smiling awkwardly. It's been a while. Yeah, it has, I replied, keeping my tone polite. I just wanted to say, Lisa's really struggling. She's not the same person anymore. I nodded, unsure of what she expected me to say. Emily, sensing the tension, reached for my hand under the table. I hope she figures things out, I said, keeping it brief. The cousin seemed satisfied enough and returned to her table. Emily didn't press me about it later, and for that, I was grateful. Jeff, on the other hand, was completely out of my orbit. The last I heard, he had moved to another state, likely trying to start over where his reputation wouldn't follow him. One day, out of curiosity, I searched his name online. The real estate board's decision to revoke his license had made the local news, and the comment section was brutal. I closed the tab, feeling oddly detached. His downfall no longer felt important to me. I'd moved past the need to see him suffer. As the holidays approached, Emily invited me to meet her family. "No pressure," she said, her tone light. "But my mom makes the best apple pie, and I could really use some backup against my nosy aunts." I agreed, partly because I was curious about her family, and partly because it felt like the right next step. The dinner was a mix of chaos and warmth, with Emily's younger siblings bickering over board games and her dad telling bad jokes at the table. Her mom's apple pie was, indeed, as good as advertised. On the drive home, Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. "They really liked you," she said. "I liked them too," I replied. And I meant it. By the time we pulled into my driveway, I realized something that startled me. I wasn't just happy, I was content. For the first time in what felt like forever, my life was my own again, and it was better than I could have imagined. Stay tuned. The best is still unfolding. The holidays felt different this year, warmer, lighter, and somehow more meaningful. Emily and I were spending more time together, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread the idea of celebrating. We decorated my house together, stringing up lights and picking out the perfect Christmas tree. "This place looks like it belongs in a Hallmark movie," Emily joked as she stepped back to admire the glowing tree. "Not bad for a guy who used to buy his decorations at the gas station," I replied, grinning. She laughed, her eyes sparkling, and for a moment, I let myself think about what the future might hold with her. Lisa, meanwhile, remained a ghost in my life. I hadn't heard from her in months, but mutual friends occasionally dropped tidbits about how she was doing, or rather, how she wasn't doing. "She's been trying to find a new job, but her reputation isn't helping," Stephanie told me during a catch-up call. "I feel bad for her, but honestly, what did she expect?" I nodded, though I didn't feel much about it anymore. Lisa's struggles weren't my concern. I'd spent enough time and energy on her mistakes. Emily's family became a bigger part of my life as the holidays went on. Her younger siblings started calling me the guy with the workshop, and her dad invited me to join their annual New Year's Day hike. "It's nothing crazy," Emily said as we packed snacks and water for the outing. "Just a little tradition we've kept since I was a kid. I think you'll like it." She was right. The hike wasn't just a chance to stretch our legs, it was a quiet, reflective way to start the year. At the top of the trail, we all stood together, looking out over the valley below as the sun broke through the clouds. Emily leaned close and whispered, "I'm glad you're here." "So am I replied, meaning every word. A week later, as I was tidying up the workshop, I got an unexpected call. It was Lisa's mother. "Daniel," she said softly, "I just wanted to let you know that Lisa's moving out of state. She's staying with a friend to get a fresh start." "That's probably for the best," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "She asked me to tell you that she's sorry for everything," her mother continued. "She knows it doesn't change anything, but she wanted you to know." I didn't respond right away. After a moment, I said, "Thank you for letting me know." When the call ended, I sat on the workbench, staring at the tools I'd meticulously organized. Lisa's apology, even secondhand, didn't feel like closure. Closure, I realized, wasn't something she could give me. It was something I'd already found for myself. Emily's influence in my life grew in quiet, meaningful ways. She encouraged me to take risks, try new things, and see myself as more than just someone who'd survived a bad marriage. One evening, we decided to cook dinner together, her idea. "You're not just a handyman," she teased. "Let's see if you can handle a chef's knife." We spent the evening laughing as I fumbled with ingredients, somehow managing to burn a pan of garlic bread while perfectly searing the steaks. "This," she said as we sat down to eat, "is why I like being around you. You're not afraid to try, even when it's messy." I raised a glass of wine. To messy attempts and new beginnings. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of hope for the future. The workshop became more than just a space for projects. It was a reflection of the life I was building. I started taking on small commissions, crafting furniture and custom pieces for people in the neighborhood. Emily often joined me, working on her own creations or simply keeping me company. One evening, as she sketched designs at the workbench, I watched her, realizing how much my life had changed in the past year. Lisa and Jeff had tried to break me, but here I was, whole, happy, and surrounded by possibilities. Life had come full circle, and though the road had been rough, I felt stronger for having walked it. The need for revenge that had consumed me at the start was gone, replaced by something steadier, peace. Lisa and Jeff were no longer part of my daily thoughts. Their betrayals had shaped me, yes, but they didn't define me anymore. Emily became an anchor in ways I hadn't expected. She had this way of grounding me, making the present feel like enough while encouraging me to dream bigger for the future. She never pushed, though. She let me move at my own pace, and that patience was something I hadn't realized I needed. One Saturday morning, she found me in the workshop. "What are you working on now?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "A bookshelf," I said, smiling at her. "A custom piece for Mrs. Harris down the street." Emily walked over, running her fingers along the smooth wood. "You're really good at this, you know," she said. "Like, you could turn this into something bigger if you wanted." I chuckled. "You think so?" She nodded. "Absolutely. I can already picture it, Daniel's designs. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" I laughed, but the idea stayed with me. Emily and I spent more weekends exploring, always finding little adventures in nearby towns or tucked-away trails. On one of those trips to the coast, we walked hand in hand along the beach as the waves lapped at our feet. "Do you ever think about what you've been through?" she asked suddenly. I paused, watching the waves. "I used to," I admitted. "A lot, actually. But not so much anymore. I think I needed to go through it to get here." She squeezed my hand and gave me a soft smile. "I'm glad you did. Because I like here. I like us." For a moment, I was overwhelmed, not by the past, but by how far I'd come. Back at home, the workshop was turning into more than just a personal project. Neighbors and friends started asking for custom pieces, a coffee table here, a set of shelves there. It felt good to create things with my hands, to take raw materials and turn them into something meaningful. Emily loved helping, even when she claimed she had no idea what she was doing. One night, as we finished assembling a chair for a friend, she laughed and said, "I think I'm finally getting the hang of this. Pretty soon, you'll be the assistant, and I'll be the expert." "Oh, is that so?" I teased, wrapping an arm around her. "Absolutely," she said, grinning. "I'll even let you keep the workshop." As the months rolled on, Lisa's name barely crossed my mind. The occasional update from mutual acquaintances painted a picture of someone still struggling, still trying to piece together a life after the fallout. "Did you hear she moved out of state?" Stephanie mentioned during one of our calls. "I did," I said simply, offering nothing more. It wasn't my story anymore. One quiet evening, Emily and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. She rested her head on my shoulder, her fingers laced with mine. "What's next for you, Daniel?" she asked softly. I thought about it, about how far I'd come and what I wanted for the future. "More of this," I said finally. "Building things that matter. Taking a few risks. Being happy." She tilted her head to look at me, her eyes warm. I liked that answer. And in that moment, I realized how true it was. Looking back, Lisa and Jeff weren't just chapters of my life, they were lessons. Lessons that taught me the value of resilience, of knowing my worth, and of choosing to rebuild instead of staying stuck in the rubble. Emily was the proof that I could move forward, that trust and love weren't out of reach. Together we were building something new, not just a relationship, but a life filled with laughter, joy, and quiet moments of connection. For the first time in years, I felt free, not just from the past, but from the doubt and anger that had weighed me down.